There's this story that goes by the name The Scorpion and the Frog, and if you're not familiar with it, allow me to give you a quick rundown. The simple premise involves the scorpion trying to cross to the other side of the river, but for obvious reasons, it can't. It sees a frog nearby and asks it to help it cross the river, but the frog is quick to decline since it knows the scorpion will sting. But in quick response, the scorpion gives a good counter-argument by saying something along the lines of, "Well, if I stung you in the back in the middle of this river, we would both die." The frog, convinced by this, lets the scorpion on its back, and both make their way across the river. Things go really well at first, until the scorpion out of nowhere stings the frog. Both die by drowning in the end, but before they succumb to death, the frog in its final moment asks, "Why?" And all that the scorpion can say at that point is, "It's in my nature." Many interpretations of the story have been shared over the years, and the most popular consensus is that the scorpion is meant to represent those who can't help but do terrible things, even if they want to break out of those habits. And no one best represents that scorpion than the man who wears one on his back for the film I'll be discussing about today, Drive. Released back in 2011 and directed by Nicholas Winding Refn, Drive was not what I was expecting when I discovered it for myself, and likely for many people who have in a way heard about this movie. Granted, I've known about it for a long time, but that's likely due to how I'm mostly familiar with the main actor Ryan Gosling in his other movies, such as Blade Runner 2049 and The Nice Guys. When it comes to Drive, if you look at the promotion for this film and heck, even the box art, you might think what you're getting is an action-packed flick with lots of driving. And while you do get both the action and the driving, I don't think that's the main selling point, since personally, Drive is a very character-driven story. It even influenced a lot of things that I like, such as my taste in music, with how the soundtrack is influenced by retro synthwave, the kind of music that you can see yourself driving out at night just to be taken away by the tunes and the atmosphere, like you're back in the 80s, and I do mean that in a good way. Trust me, we will get to the soundtrack, but for the here and now, it's incredible. It even to an extent served as inspiration for one of my favourite indie games of all time, Hotline Miami, which is funny considering how both main characters do have similar appearances, and that game has an Easter egg to the film with the driver's jacket being featured if you keep an eye out. But with all that being said, allow me to discuss the main topic at hand, and I hope you all enjoyed the video. Just keep in mind that spoilers will be discussed for a film that's over 10 years old now. Drive opens up with our main protagonist on a phone call to a client in his apartment room, and in this introduction, we do get a good amount of information on who we're dealing with. A map is seen with routes marked, and the call goes on to tell us that the guy's main profession is being a getaway driver. It presents so much in little detail that it doesn't go overboard with the exposition, allowing you to pick up the pieces to put together, which is something that I really appreciate about this film. I should note at this point that the main lead is only known by his nickname, the Driver. Yes, that's how the character is named in the credits, which does add a bit of mystery to the fact that you don't know his real name, but I don't think it really matters that much, since it does give you a grand idea of what he does and how really good he is at it. Also, throughout this video, do not take a shot every time I say the Driver, because if I'm going to be real with you, I don't think you're going to survive. Before he sets off for the job in question, he does arrive at a garage to get his ride for the night, while also meeting with the owner of the place and his boss called Shannon, played by Bryan Cranston, who in this scene also speaks for the driver, which also gives out another bit of info on the driver's character. The driver doesn't speak as much as other characters in the movie, and in a way kinda confirms to me that he's introverted, which I do think is the case given how he's presented visually in the movie. He lacks much emotion when driving at night, and how lonely he seems to be in certain scenes throughout the film, along with how he interacts with other people to a degree, almost like he's a man of few words. Which, in a way, you could see him as someone that thinks he's the hero in his own story that develops throughout the film, and given the actor's statement on the character of the driver as someone who seems to watch too many movies, I can certainly see that being the case. As the driver arrives to help some robbers, there are minor details shown, like how the driver attaches and sets a stopwatch to the car wheel, while tuning into the radio comms of law enforcement. Honestly, it's the little moments like this that really show how efficient the driver is, like the kind of person that gets things done to a T when it comes to his profession. I mean, he is a getaway driver after all, and is not afraid to have some class while at it. After pulling off his getaway job for some crooks and managing to escape the law by blending into a crowd of basketball fans, we do get a track to open Drive that is really good and is worth playing in the title card, being Klebinski's Night Call. Right off the bat, this track and many I'll discuss throughout Drive are absolutely amazing in setting the tone of the film and having ties to the narrative throughout the lyrics heard within them. As the driver leaves to return to his apartment after a job well done, we do get treated to some excellent cinematography both in the car and in the film's setting of a late night Los Angeles. Not to mention the great use of lighting to boot, which really sells the isolation of the driver very well in the end. All of this, combined with Night Call, makes the introduction overall just an amazing way to introduce Drive, and all of it is just chef's kiss for me. I don't think I can add much that hasn't already been said, other than the fact that Night Call is a blast. After that introduction, we do get to see what the driver does in his spare time, with him being a stunt driver for a Hollywood movie set, while also preparing himself by wearing a mask for the stunt. Keep that mask in mind because it will come back later. Now, remember how I said that the film was not what I expected? Well, that's because in reality, Drive is a neo-noir love story between our main lead and a woman he comes across known as Irene. It starts fairly innocent, with their interactions being a few words and moments that are very awkward to say the least. As all of this goes on, the driver finds purpose and comfort with someone that, in a way, is like a mirrored version of himself. Shy, awkward, and feeling a bit out of place in the world. Of course, Irene herself does have a child to take care of with Benicio, with the driver learning about his real father from Irene, who tells him that he is in prison. He does return later, but we'll get to that character in a bit, since the person in question does kickstart a lot of the film's major events, as you will see down the line. We do get introduced to the criminal world aspect of the film in a pizzeria, with Shannon talking to Bernie Ross about how his business is struggling, with how a lot of cars he works for the stunt sets being destroyed and likely not making it in the final cut, while asking Bernie for a hard new stock car and trying to make a deal for lots of money. Now, Bernie is of course played by Albert Brooks, who I was surprised to remember while researching for this film was actually the voice of Marlin from Finding Nemo. Oh, and Russ Cargill from the Simpsons movie. Along with the next character being introduced with Nino, who is played by Ron Perlman. They both do really great performances as these crime bosses that serve as the main antagonists of the movie, but the thing that surprised me is at how humanized these two are, in a sense that they too have to deal with lots of wrongdoings that happen in the life of crime, and they do have some really fun highlights for me. When Shannon introduces the driver to Bernie, they share lines of dialogue to each other that at first sound really cool with them making an impression on each other, but in retrospect, what they say turns out to be a major case of foreshadowing, which is done brilliantly as you'll see future events transpire. While the driver focuses on fixing Irene's car that broke down early on in the movie, Shannon offers the driver to get both her and Benicio back home safely. On the way back, the driver says he has something to show to the two, and Irene agrees. This of course kicks off the next iconic track of the film, A Real Hero from College featuring Electronic Youth. And my god, this track is so good. As the song plays, everyone seems to be having a great time, with the driver showing signs of happiness, with the main lyrics being how he feels like a real hero and a real human being. This scene as a whole gives me the impression that if the driver were to get out of his life a crime and had a normal life, this is what he would do if he was given the chance, just to be with Irene and her son. I just really love the use of warm colours in this scene, giving us a good glance of what the driver's mindset is like being with the people that he cares for. And as they return home, there's one little detail that I do like with how the driver's scorpion jacket is over Benicio, just a neat little moment that adds a bit of character to the driver for me. Also, I will say this right off the bat, the vocalist for this track from Electronic Youth just has a voice of an angel, I'm gonna be honest. The scene ends with both Irene and the driver having a moment of comfort, with both of them saying very little and their faces doing pretty much all the talking for us in this odd but very wholesome moment. I do appreciate it when the dialogue is minimum in films and how actions say more than words, which works wonders for Drive. And funny enough, in one interview for the film, even Ryan Gosling himself agrees on this notion.
I don't think you need all this talking in movies. Sometimes it's easier to get the point across if you're not saying something. You know, the audience is smart. They can see how somebody feels or how they feel about that person or whatever. So sometimes when you're talking, I think, for me anyway, it just gets in the way of it, and so it was a real relief to get to just take that out of this and let people just watch it and make their own assessments of what they think the characters are going through.
However, the relationship between the two doesn't last long as Irene's husband returns from prison. This then leads to the next major track that plays, Under Your Spell from Desire. The track plays as the driver is alone in his room at night sorting out a car engine, and during the welcome party next to him, we see Irene's husband, Standard, thanking everyone after returning from his time in prison. Of course, Standard is played by Oscar Isaac. Yes, the one that's in many projects nowadays that you might be more than familiar with. As he raises a toast for Irene for staying with him, the main lyrics are heard as the camera focuses on both Irene and the driver, as they can't help but think of each other. Now, I have a bit of a confession to make. Even though all the main tracks in Drive are absolutely amazing in their own right, Under Your Spell might be my personal favourite track. Yes, most people do know this film for Nightcall and such, but there's just something about Under Your Spell that just gets to me. The music that plays does wonders for the scene in question, and though the lyrics are simple, I do relate to what's going on between the driver and Irene. So to give a quick conclusion, Under Your Spell is another killer track that was so worth including in the film, and it definitely has become another favourite track of mine in the end. Now, with Standard's return, you might think that Drive might take a bit of a nosedive considering how there might be a love triangle going on. But in a surprising manner, this film does not contain a love triangle that major, and honestly, I think it's for the best given how I don't like love triangles in stories, personally. Later on in the film, we do see the driver hanging out alone, clearly looking saddened by recent events, only for that moment of silence to break when a man walks up to him. The person in question seems to know the driver from a past job that he did for him and his brother, while offering him a new job to take, until out of nowhere, the driver snaps. Those moments early on in the film where our main protagonist was calm around those he cared about suddenly gets thrown out the window as we see a much darker side to the character that we've never seen before. Of course, there were implications early on that in a way foreshadowed who the driver might be, and that does great in adding another very disturbing layer to the character. Now, at this point in the video, I will have to say that major spoilers are coming up for events that are going to happen, and trust me when I tell you, Drive enters a point of no return. While parking his car, the driver notices two people walking away armed with a weapon and one of them having their hands covered in blood, only to discover that Standard was beaten to a bloody pulp with Benicio hiding near the scene. While back at home, the driver asks Standard who were the men that assaulted him, only for him to admit owning protection money to some guys he knew back in prison, and the only way he can get out of this situation is by robbing a pawn shop for them. The driver does offer to help after hearing that Irene and Benicio will be next, and he notices that a bullet was given to the kid by one of the thugs. The bullet does come back for another brutal scene, but we'll get to that much later. Before beginning to take the job, the driver is invited to dinner, in which Standard tells his son how he met Irene, and let's just say shit hits 100 really quick, with the fact that Standard approached Irene when she was 17 years old. For a quick fact, the age of consent in California is 18 years old, and this makes the scene go into a really dark place with Standard's backstory. Heck, even Irene is uncomfortable with what's being discussed, giving a big hint that the family isn't what it's cracked up to be. So yeah, if you ask me, Poe Dameron is definitely going behind bars for sure for what happened. We now get to see who the client is that Standard owes money to, known as Cook, as the driver offers to be the getaway driver for the robbery at hand, while also being joined by another member of the team, Blanche. Cook offers no reward for the task, but the driver still takes part in hopes of paying Standard's debt and making sure Irene and her son are left alone. While waiting outside of the location of the robbery, things go as planned, with Blanche being the first to get back in the car, until the film enters a point of no return when Standard gets shot and brutally killed, causing a massive shock and both survivors to drive out quickly, only to be chased down by another car that was parked next to the scene of the murder. The car chase is shot really nicely, and the action we do get to see after spending so much time with the characters is done really well. Granted, as mentioned before, Drive doesn't have too much action since it is character focused, but the moments we do get when things get serious in the second and final acts are executed perfectly. However, things are about to get more violent, so this roller coaster is not over yet. With Standard's death being in the news and Irene finding out about it, both the driver and Blanche are hiding in a motel room with the stolen money, only for the driver to be very suspicious with Blanche with what happened. This is when the driver goes full on psychopath with interrogating her and, well, you look at Ryan's performance and you tell me you wouldn't shit your pants in fear, as his true nature to hurt people is finally shown after so much build up throughout the runtime. The driver, as you can imagine, is going to do much worse things, all just to protect Irene. So after that horrifying interrogation, shit goes back to 100 again as two hitmen discover them, only for Blanche to die brutally. With his back against the wall, the driver takes care of them in a very gory manner, and for some reason when I watch this scene, I can't help but play the soundtrack of Hotline Miami in my head. I'm sure those who played or heard of the game can understand why. After surviving his encounter with the hitman, the driver later on hunts down Cook and finds him at a strip club. And right off the bat, I can't show too much of the scene for very obvious reasons, so I'm pretty confident you can use your imaginations to fill in the blanks. So here's a quick rundown. Cook gets his hand smashed by a hammer, the driver interrogates him like a madman and discovers that the stolen money is Nino's, and even takes the bullet we saw early on and makes Cook swallow it. A lot to take in, I know, but at the very least we can get back on track. The driver returns home to inform Irene about what happened while getting a huge slap in the process. Now, Drive is known for many things, but what happens next is one of the most infamous scenes in the whole film. The elevator scene. And my god, there's a lot to unpack, so strap yourselves in for what's to come. Both of them enter an elevator only to be greeted by a hitman that Nino has sent, and with all three of them now in a tight space, the driver notices the hitman carrying a gun. At this point, he realizes he has to do the unthinkable in front of Irene, so before that, he turns around to her and they both share a kiss, in a small but wonderful moment. And we all know what's gonna happen next, so I won't be wasting any more time. With the true nature of the driver shown, Irene walks out of the elevator in horror as the driver gives her a very concerned look as the doors slowly shut. The scene ends with a perfect shot focusing on the scorpion on the driver's jacket, which does bring back that story I told you at the very beginning of the video with the scorpion and the frog. No matter how hard he tries, the driver is going to be pulled back into his dark habits, even if it means he may never live a normal life. Which personally puts him in a very moral grey area where he's capable of doing good in the world, but at his lowest, his violent nature just keeps coming back. And overall, that in the end makes the main protagonist a very complex character where you don't know if you should like or fear him. So to conclude, all the build-up that we see in Drive is executed to perfection for me. At a later point back in the pizzeria, both Bernie and Nino have their backs to a wall with what's been going on with both the money and the driver. With events heating up more than they should, Nino brings up that the driver needs to be taken care of once and for all, which ends with Cook, who is with them, to meet a very gory death by Bernie. Jeez, remind me not to piss off Nemo's dad again. The driver returns back to the car garage to check up on Shannon, only to meet a horrifying reality with Shannon lying dead. His death was caused by a slit wrist that Bernie inflicted before then, and with his death, the last major track plays, as the driver loads up his car for the final act. Oh My Love, for lack of a better word, is just pure beauty, with the vocals being beyond amazing and the music itself just knocking it out of the park. In all honesty, when I first heard it, I felt somewhat emotional because of how good it was. It even kind of brought a tear to my eye. The track accompanies the following scene as the driver discovers where Nino is at while wearing a mask. Now, remember early on when I told you about that mask he wore during a movie set? Well, the driver managed to pick it up beforehand and in a way wears it like he's embracing his alter ego or persona, almost like he views himself as some kind of hero about to finally take care of some crime bosses. While Nino leaves to be escorted in his car, he is followed along the way, causing the driver to make his move and thus ending the song. With the car stopped, the driver makes another move to crash Nino from the road over down to a beach. With Nino surviving and making his way out of the wreck, the driver watches from the high ground like a monster about to close in for the kill in a very memorable shot, which concludes when Nino tries to swim away, but given the strong tides, he fails as he is drowned by the driver in the end. Bernie then gets contacted afterwards to discover that on the call with the driver, Nino is dead, as the driver also brings up the scorpion and the frog. Both agree to meet face to face to tie up loose ends, but before that, Irene gets what is likely a final call from our protagonist, saying she might not see him again. When both men finally meet, Bernie gives an ultimatum which does come at a very huge cost for the driver. Both arrive at the truck of the car to get the money, only for Bernie to stab him in the end. But the driver in retaliation also stabs him in the neck, killing him instantly. As he lays in his car injured and possibly on the brink of death, a real hero is heard quietly as the driver gets back up, as Bernie is left for dead, as well as the money. Irene goes to knock at his apartment for the last time in hopes of seeing him again, but leaves likely accepting that won't happen. The film concludes with the driver driving off into the night, never to be seen again. Drive in the end is a film that I consider to be a masterpiece. It has all the right elements in play to its story, the characters, the acting, cinematography, themes, the music, you name it, Drive hits all the right notes for me. Ryan Gosling is so fantastic in the role as the driver that if it wasn't for this movie, I wouldn't have seen him in later films where he is excellent in. It's not just Ryan as well, as the rest of the cast do give out great performances all round and make Drive all the more better for it. Along with the presentation being brilliant, I can't say any more about the soundtrack that hasn't already been said. It has got to be one of my favourite film soundtracks of all time, and I'm definitely going to be adding it to my collection one day. While a part of me wished there was some sort of continuation of Drive, I'm more than glad about how it ended, considering if it did get a follow-up, I think it would have ruined the impact of the ending for me personally. So in conclusion, if you are lucky to find this movie, you owe it to yourself to discover one of the best films I was more than happy to finally see. Heck, if you were someone that was disappointed with it at first, considering how Drive was marketed back then, I think it really does deserve a second chance, and honestly, you might appreciate it even more than you might have realized. Which is why Drive in the end gets a massive recommendation.